Picture, if you will, a river valley in the heart of what we now call southern Germany, though in the time we are visiting, it has no such name. It is simply the land of the Franks, part of a vast kingdom ruled by a man named Charlemagne, though that great king is far away tonight, and his concerns are not ours. Our concern is much smaller, much gentler, and much closer to the earth. There is an abbey in this valley. It sits on a rise above the river, sheltered by hills to the north and east, with orchards stepping down the southern slope toward the water. Its walls are thick, made of pale local stone, and its rooftops are dark with wooden shingles that have weathered many seasons of rain and snow. A bell tower rises above the chapel, not terribly tall, but visible for some distance across the farmland that surrounds it. The abbey is called St. Felician's, and it has stood here for almost 70 years, founded by a bishop whose name is now barely remembered, tended and expanded by the generations of men and women who have lived within its walls. It is the autumn of the year 802, by the reckoning that will one day become standard. The evening air carries the smell of wood smoke and wet leaves. The river murmurs below the hill. Somewhere in the orchard, the last of the season's apples are softening on the branch, and the monks have spent the afternoon gathering what they can before the frost takes the rest. Let us go closer. Let us walk through the gate, a heavy oak door set in the outer wall, worn smooth by the hands of decades, and step into the world within. The courtyard is quiet at this hour. The light is the color of honey, low and amber, and the shadows are long. A cat, one of the abbey's several, sits on a sun-warmed stone near the kitchen wall, watching nothing in particular with the absolute patience that only a cat possesses. From the chapel, faintly, comes the sound of chanting. The monks are singing vespers, the evening office, their voices blending into a single resonant hum that seems to come from the stone itself. It is a sound that has marked this hour at this place every single day for as long as anyone here can remember. This is where our story begins. Not with kings or conquests, not with great events that shake the world, but with the quiet, ordinary lives of the people who live behind these walls, people who rise before the sun, who pray and work and eat and sleep according to rhythms that have not changed in centuries, and who are doing something that they themselves may not fully understand. They are keeping the light alive. They are copying by hand, word by word, page by page, the books that contain the learning of the ancient world, the philosophy, the science, the poetry, the history, all of it threatened, all of it fragile, all of it resting in their ink-stained hands. But that is the grand version of the story, and grand stories are not what we need tonight. Tonight we need the human version. We need the sore fingers and the cold mornings and the small jokes scribbled in the margins of manuscripts. We need the friendships and the doubts and the quiet moments of wonder. We need to know what it felt like to be here, in this valley, in this century, doing this work. So let us meet 3 people. Let us get to know them gently, the way you come to know a neighbor, slowly, over time, through small observations and shared silences and the accumulation of ordinary days. The first person we meet is a man named Cormac. He is not from this valley. He is not from this country. He was born on the western coast of Ireland, on a wind-bitten headland where the Atlantic pounds the cliffs with a kind of fury that is hard to imagine here in this sheltered valley. He left that place 12 years ago, crossing the sea to Britain and then to the continent, carrying with him a leather satchel of books and a restless, searching mind that has never entirely found what it is looking for. Cormac is 38 years old. His hair, what little of it remains below his tonsure, has gone more gray than brown, and his hands are large and weathered, not the hands of a man who has spent his whole life indoors, though that is mostly what he does now. He has a long face and deep-set eyes that seem to be permanently squinting, as if he is always trying to read something just slightly too far away. He walks with a slight forward lean, the posture of a man accustomed to bending over a writing desk. He arrived at St. Felician 6 years ago, one of several Irish monks who have made their way to Frankish monasteries during this era. The Irish called this practice peregrinatio, a kind of holy wandering, a voluntary exile undertaken for the sake of God and learning. To leave one's homeland forever, to walk into the unknown, this was considered one of the highest forms of devotion. But if you were to ask Cormac about it, in one of those rare moments when he is inclined to speak honestly, he might tell you that his reasons for leaving Ireland were not entirely holy. He might tell you that he was running from grief as much as running toward God. On this particular evening, as Vespers ends and the monks file out of the chapel into the cooling air, Cormac does not go directly to the refectory for the evening meal. Instead, he walks along the eastern cloister, a covered walkway with arched openings that look out onto the central garden, and he pauses by one of the columns, resting his forehead against the cool stone. He is thinking about his mother. He does this more often than he would admit. She was alive when he left Ireland, a small woman with strong hands and a voice that could carry across a field. She had not wanted him to go. She had stood at the gate of the monastery at Clonmacnoise, where he had trained since boyhood, and she had pressed a sprig of dried heather into his hand and told him to carry it always, and he had carried it for 7 years before it finally crumbled to dust in the bottom of his satchel. He does not know if she is still alive. Letters are rare, and the distance is immense. He holds her in his mind the way one holds a candle flame, carefully, tenderly, knowing it could go out at any moment. But Cormac is not a man who dwells in sadness, at least not outwardly. He is, in fact, the closest thing St. Felician has to a wit. The other monks have learned that if they sit near him at meals, on those days when conversation is permitted, he will offer some small, dry observation about the weather or the food or the abbot's latest pronouncement that will make them press their lips together in an effort not to laugh. He collects riddles the way other men collect relics. He learned this from the Irish tradition, where wordplay and puzzles were considered a high art, and he has a small leather notebook, separate from his official work, in which he writes down every riddle he hears or invents in a cramped, spidery hand that only he can read. In the Scriptorium, where he spends most of his daylight hours, Cormac is the most skilled scribe at St. Felician. His hand is steady, his Latin is impeccable, and he can read Greek, a rare ability in the Frankish lands, and one that makes him invaluable. He is currently engaged in the work that will occupy him for the better part of 2 years, copying a complete text of Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy, a work written nearly 3 centuries earlier by a Roman senator awaiting execution. It is a book about finding peace in the face of suffering, about the relationship between fortune and virtue, about the nature of true happiness, and it is a book that troubles Cormac deeply, though not in the way his superiors might expect. The trouble is that he agrees with it, not with the Christian overlay that later scholars have applied to it, but with the deeper, older, more pagan currents of the text, the idea that reason alone can be a source of consolation, that the mind, properly trained, can find its own way to peace without the intercession of prayer or sacrament. Cormac is a monk. He has taken vows. He believes, in a general and somewhat weathered way, in God. But when he reads Boethius, or when he encounters passages of Aristotle or Cicero in the texts that pass through the Scriptorium, he feels something stir in him that is not quite faith and not quite doubt, but something in between, a kind of intellectual hunger that his daily prayers do not entirely satisfy. He has never spoken of this to anyone. He carries it silently, the way he carries the memory of his mother, the way he carries the ghost of Irish rain on his skin. It is simply part of who he is, a man suspended between worlds, between Ireland and Francia, between faith and philosophy, between the life he chose and the life he sometimes imagines. Let us leave him there for now, leaning against the cloister column in the fading light, and go to find someone else. If you walk from the cloister toward the dormitory and then turn left down a narrow corridor that smells of damp stone and tallow candles, you will find a small room that serves as a kind of storage closet for the Scriptorium. Spare parchment, jars of dried ink, bundles of goose quills waiting to be cut. It is not a room where anyone is supposed to linger, and yet, if you were to open the door quietly on this particular evening, you would find a young man sitting cross-legged on the floor with a scrap of parchment on his knee and a piece of charcoal in his hand. He is drawing. The image taking shape beneath his fingers is a hair, not a stylized hair from a manuscript border, not a symbolic hair representing some theological concept, but a real hair, caught in mid-leap, its ears back, its body elongated with the effort of flight. It is remarkably good. There is a life in it, a sense of movement that is genuinely striking. The young man does not know this. He thinks he is simply passing the time. His name is Theodoric. He is 19 years old, the second son of a minor Frankish lord whose lands lie 2 days' ride to the north. He was given to Sanct Felician at the age of 7, an oblate, a child offered to God by parents who had their own reasons. His father, a man named Aldrich, had 3 sons, and only enough land for 1 heir. The church was the expected destination for the surplus boys. Theodoric's older brother inherited the estate. His younger brother was sent to train as a soldier in a count's household. Theodoric was brought to the abbey gate on a grey morning in autumn, his hand held by a servant because his father did not make the journey himself, and he was given to the abbot with a small donation of silver and a letter of introduction. He remembers very little of that day. He remembers the gate. He remembers the sound it made when it closed behind him. He remembers that the servant, an older man named Wilmar, who had been kind to him, squeezed his shoulder once before turning away, and that the squeeze lasted longer than it needed to, as if Wilmar wanted to say something but could not find the words. Theodoric has lived at Sanct Felician for 12 years now. He has been educated here. He reads and writes Latin fluently. He knows his psalms. He can mix ink and prepare parchment and sing all the offices from memory. He is dutiful and quiet and well-liked. The other monks consider him gentle, perhaps a bit dreamy. The novice master, Brother Anselm, once told the abbot that Theodoric would make a fine monk when the time came for his permanent vows. But Theodoric has not yet taken those vows. He is approaching the age at which he must decide, or more accurately, the age at which the decision will be assumed for him if he does not actively resist it. And he does not know what he wants. He knows what is expected. He knows the shape of the life that awaits him, the same halls, the same hours, the same prayers, the same slow turning of the seasons within these walls for the rest of his days. It is not a bad life. He is fed, he is sheltered, he is part of a community that for the most part is kind to him. But something in him, something he cannot name and does not fully understand, feels compressed, like a seed that has been placed in a pot too small for the plant it wants to become. The drawings are part of it. He has been making them since he was a child, scratching figures into the dirt of the courtyard with a stick, later graduating to charcoal on scraps of discarded parchment. He draws everything, the cat on the kitchen wall, the shape of the hills seen through the cloister arches, the face of old Brother Paulus who falls asleep during sext with his mouth open. He draws the hares that come to the orchard at dusk, and the pattern of ice on the well bucket in winter, and the way candlelight makes shadows move on a vaulted ceiling. No one has taught him. No one has encouraged him. The other monks are vaguely aware that he sketches, but they consider it a minor eccentricity, like Cormac's riddles, harmless but not particularly important. Theodoric's father, Aldrich, visits once a year, usually in early summer. He is a broad, weathered man with a soldier's bearing who seems to fill any room he enters and who has never quite learned how to speak to his middle son. Their conversations are brief and slightly awkward. Aldrich asks about Theodoric's studies. Theodoric gives polite answers, and they stand together in the guest hall with the distinct air of two people who share blood but very little else. Aldrich always brings a gift, a new belt, a pair of good leather shoes, and Theodoric always thanks him, and they part with an embrace that is genuine but incomplete, as if both of them are reaching for something they cannot quite grasp. It is after one of these visits, earlier the same year, that Theodoric began drawing more, as if his father's presence and his departure stirred something loose inside him, some question about who he is and who he might become if he were ever allowed to choose for himself. But for now, on this autumn evening, he is simply sitting on the floor of a storage room, drawing a hare. And the hare is beautiful, and no one is there to see it. There is one more person to meet before we settle into the life of this place. If you leave the main cluster of monastic buildings and walk south, past the vegetable garden and the goat enclosure, you come to a low stone building with a thatched roof and a door that is almost always open, even in cool weather, because the woman who works here believes that fresh air is as important to healing as any herb or prayer. Her name is Ingrid. She is 53 years old, and she runs the hospice, the small infirmary attached to the abbey where the sick and injured are tended. She is not a nun in the formal sense, though she has taken private vows, and she lives according to a personal rule of devotion that is, if anything, more demanding than the one the monks follow. She is what this era would call a conversa, a laywoman who has dedicated her life to religious service without entering a full monastic order. She lives in a small cell attached to the hospice. She attends the chapel services when her work allows, and she answers to the abbot, who trusts her judgment in medical matters more than he trusts his own. Ingrid was not always here. Before she came to Sankt Felician, she was a wife and mother. She married at 16, a carpenter's daughter wed to a blacksmith in a village not far from here. She had 3 children. The first, a daughter, died in infancy, a fever that came in the night and could not be turned back. The second, a son named Bertram, lived to the age of 11 before a winter sickness took him. The third, another daughter, survived and is now a grown woman, married, living in a town to the west. Ingrid sees her once every year or two, and these visits are the brightest points in her calendar, though she would not say so aloud. Her husband died when she was 36, an accident at the forge, a burn that became infected, a slow and terrible decline. After his death, Ingrid found that the world she had known, the village, the neighbors, the rhythms of domestic life, no longer held her. Grief had opened something in her, a space that needed to be filled with purpose. She had always had a skill with herbs and remedies her own mother had taught her, and she began to tend the sick in her village, and then in neighboring villages. And then, eventually, she came to the abbey, where the previous infirmarian, an elderly monk named Brother Felix, recognized her abilities and persuaded the abbot to let her stay. That was 17 years ago. In the time since, Ingrid has become one of the most essential people at Sankt Felician, though she would never describe herself that way. Her herb garden is one of the finest in the region, neat rows of sage, rue, fennel, comfrey, yarrow, lavender, pennyroyal, and dozens of other plants, each one tended with a precision that borders on devotion. She knows which herbs ease a fever and which settle a stomach, which can be made into a poultice for a wound, and which, taken in the wrong quantity, can stop a heart. She has set bones and stitched cuts, and sat with dying men through long nights, holding their hands and murmuring prayers that are half scripture and half something older. Words her mother taught her, words that come from a tradition that predates the church, but that Ingrid has never seen any reason to abandon. She is a practical woman, Ingrid. She has little patience for theological abstraction. The debates that Cormac finds so stimulating leave her cold. When the monks argue about the nature of the Trinity or the proper interpretation of a passage from Augustine, she listens with the polite, slightly distant expression of someone watching children play a game whose rules she has never learned. Her faith is not intellectual, it is physical, rooted in the body and the earth, expressed through the act of caring for others. She believes in God the way she believes in the ground beneath her feet, not because she has been convinced by arguments, but because she has felt it hold her up. And yet, Ingrid carries her own questions. They are not Cormac's questions. She does not wonder about the reconciliation of faith and reason or the implications of pagan philosophy. Her questions are simpler and in some ways harder. She wonders why her son died. She wonders why God, if God is good, allows children to be taken from their mothers. She does not ask these questions in anger. She asks them the way one asks about the weather, as things that are real and present and must be acknowledged, even if they cannot be changed. On this evening, Ingrid is in her garden, kneeling in the dirt between rows of rosemary, pulling the last weeds before the growing season truly ends. Her hands are brown and strong and stained with the green of crushed leaves. The air around her smells of earth and herbs, a deep, complicated scent that is one of the most comforting things in this world. She works slowly, deliberately, the way she does everything, and she hums a melody that is neither a hymn nor a folk song, but something that seems to exist only in the space between the two. When the bell rings for the evening meal, she rises, brushes the dirt from her knees, and walks toward the refectory. As she passes the cloister, she sees Cormac still standing by his column, lost in thought, and she pauses long enough to say something quiet to him. We cannot hear the words, but we can see the effect. He straightens, nods, and follows her toward the warm light of the dining hall. It is a small moment, the kind that happens every day, but it tells us something important about these two people. They are friends, not the dramatic, storied kind of friendship, but the deep, unspoken kind that grows between people who have shared the same place for years and who recognize something in each other, some quality of solitude, some private weight that does not need to be named. Let us move now into the heart of what makes this place remarkable, though the people who live here might not use that word. Let us visit the Scriptorium on a morning in late autumn, when the light comes through the tall windows in long, pale columns, and the air is just cold enough to make the monks grateful for the small brazier that burns in the corner. The Scriptorium at Sankt Felician is a long, narrow room on the upper floor of the south building, positioned to catch the best light. There are 8 writing desks arranged along the window wall, each one a sloped wooden surface set at an angle, with a small shelf for ink and quills and a hook for the oil lamp that will be needed as the days grow shorter. The floor is bare stone, scrubbed clean. The walls are whitewashed. It is not a beautiful room, but it is a purposeful one, and there is a quality of concentration in it, a hush, a density of attention that you can almost feel on your skin. On this morning, 5 monks are at work. Cormac is at the desk nearest the largest window, his copy of Boethius open before him, the original text propped on a wooden stand to his left. He works with a goose feather quill cut to a fine edge with his penknife, dipping it into a small well of iron gall ink, a dark, slightly purplish-brown liquid made from oak galls, iron salts, and gum arabic. The ink has a faintly metallic smell, like old pennies left in the rain. He writes in a careful, upright script, Carolingian minuscule, the clean, legible hand that has spread across the Frankish lands during Charlemagne's reign, and that will one day, centuries from now, become the basis for the lowercase letters you read today. The work is slow. Each letter is formed individually with a specific sequence of strokes, and the spacing must be even, the lines straight. A single page, perhaps 300 words, might take the better part of a day. A full manuscript can take months or even years, depending on its length and the complexity of any decoration. The parchment itself is precious, made from calfskin or sheepskin that has been soaked in lime, scraped clean of hair and flesh, stretched on a frame, dried, and rubbed smooth with pumice stone. It takes an entire animal hide to produce a few pages. A complete Bible might require the skins of 200 calves. Nothing here is wasted. Nothing here is rushed. Cormac's hands ache, as they usually do by mid-morning. The repetitive motion of writing, the grip on the quill, the precise flexion of the fingers, produces a deep soreness in the joints that never quite goes away. In the margins of a manuscript he completed last year, a psalter, he scribbled a small note in Irish that translates roughly as, "Oh, my hand." It was a joke of sorts. Other scribes across other monasteries have written similar things, a shared lament that passes between copyists like a secret handshake across the centuries. Writing is excessive drudgery, another scribe has written somewhere in another country. It crooks your back, it dims your sight, it twists your stomach and your sides. And yet they continue, and yet the pages accumulate, and yet the words survive. Why? This is the question that might occur to you, drifting here in the quiet of this room, watching these men bend over their desks in the pale light. Why do they do it? The ink is tedious to make, the parchment is laborious to prepare, the hours are long, and the work is physically punishing. Most of these monks will never travel more than a few miles from this abbey. They will never see the places described in the texts they copy. They will never meet the authors whose words they reproduce letter by letter across the centuries. And most of them, if you ask them directly, would give you a practical and humble answer. It is their duty. The rule of Saint Benedict prescribes manual labor, and this is the labor they have been assigned. It is no different in their minds from tending the garden or baking the bread. But there is one person at Sankt Felician who sees it differently. His name is Abbot Leovold, and he is the man who sets the Scriptorium's work and chooses which texts will be copied. Leovold is 61 years old, a small, fine-boned man with a scholar's stoop and an administrator's shrewdness, and he has a vision that extends far beyond these walls. He has read the letters that arrive from Charlemagne's court at Aachen, urging monasteries to improve their schools and their libraries, to seek out and preserve the writings of the ancient world. He has corresponded with Alcuin of York, the great scholar who serves as Charlemagne's advisor on educational reform, and he has come to believe, quietly, deeply, with the conviction of a man who has thought about it for a very long time, that the work being done in his scriptorium is not merely duty, it is salvation, not the salvation of souls, but the salvation of knowledge itself. Leovold does not speak of this often. He is not a dramatic man, but occasionally, in the chapter meetings that follow the morning office, he will say something that lands differently from the usual administrative announcements. He will speak of the libraries that were lost when the Roman Empire fell, the great collections of Alexandria, of Rome, of Constantinople, repositories of learning that took centuries to build and were destroyed in years, sometimes in days. He will speak of the fragility of a written page, how easily it can be consumed by fire, by water, by neglect, by the simple passage of time. And he will say, in his mild, measured voice, that every text they copy is a small act of defiance against forgetting, that the words they write today may be read by someone 1,000 years hence, someone who will know the thoughts of Boethius or Virgil or Aristotle only because a monk in a valley in Francia took the trouble to write them down. It is a stirring idea, and it settles into the monks in different ways. Some hear it and return to their desks with a slightly renewed sense of purpose. Some hear it and think, not unkindly, that the abbot is getting old and philosophical. But Cormac hears it and feels something shift inside him, a reframing of the work that gives it a weight it did not have before. He looks at the page of Boethius before him, at the words he has been faithfully transcribing, and he thinks, I am a bridge. This text passed from a Roman's hand to an Irish monastery, and from there to my teacher's hand, and from my teacher to me, and from me it will pass to the next copyist, and the next, and the next, a chain of hands stretching across the dark. And if I break the chain, if I am careless, if I stop, if I let the fire go out, then what was given to me is lost. It is a heavy thought, but it is also, in its own way, a comfort, because it gives the aching hands a reason. It gives the long, cold hours a purpose, and it connects Cormac, lonely, far from home, suspended between faith and doubt, to something larger than himself. Winter comes to the valley slowly and then all at once. The days shorten. The light in the Scriptorium grows thin and gray, and the monks must stop work earlier and earlier in the afternoon because the rule discourages working by candlelight. The risk of fire near precious manuscripts is too great. The brazier in the corner burns constantly now, but it is not enough. The ink thickens in the cold and must be warmed by the scribe's breath or held near the flame before it will flow. Cormac wraps his hands in strips of cloth with the fingers cut free, a technique he learned in Ireland where the cold was wet and constant. The rhythm of the day tightens around its frame of prayer. The monks rise in the deep darkness for matins, the night office, sometime around 2 in the morning. Imagine that, stepping from your straw mattress into the freezing dark, pulling your woolen cowl over your head, shuffling down a stone corridor by the light of a single candle carried by the brother ahead of you, filing into the chapel where your breath makes clouds in the air and the stone floor sends the cold straight through the soles of your shoes, and then singing psalms for an hour, sometimes longer, in that darkness, your voice joining the others until the individual voices disappear and there is only the sound, ancient and resonant, filling the chapel like water filling a vessel. After matins, some monks return to bed, others stay and pray silently, or read, or simply sit in the dark with their thoughts. Lauds follows at dawn, and then prime at the first full light, and the day begins in earnest. It is during these winter months that the relationships between our 3 characters deepen in ways that will matter later. Cormac and Ingrid have known each other for years, but their friendship has always had a particular quality, a kind of mutual respect between 2 people who see the world very differently, but who have each, in their own way, made peace with solitude. During the winter, when the Scriptorium closes early and the evenings are long, Cormac begins to visit the hospice in the late afternoon. Ostensibly, he comes to help. Ingrid often needs someone to read aloud from the medical texts she consults, her own Latin being serviceable but not fluent. But really, he comes for the conversation. They sit in the hospice's small workroom, which smells of dried herbs and beeswax and wood ash, and they talk, or rather, Ingrid works, grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, rolling bandages, sorting seeds for the spring planting, and Cormac talks. He tells her about the texts he is copying. He describes the ideas of Boethius, translating the Latin into simple, concrete terms that Ingrid can grasp and respond to. And she does respond, not with the trained arguments of a scholar, but with the blunt, grounded observations of a woman who has lived a full life and buried a husband and 2 children, and come out the other side with her eyes clear. When Cormac explains Boethius's argument that true happiness cannot be found in external fortune, that wealth, power, and even love are unreliable, and that only the cultivation of inner virtue can provide lasting peace, Ingrid listens carefully, and then says something that Cormac will think about for a long time afterward. She says that she has held her dying son in her arms, and that in that moment there was no philosophy that could have consoled her, and no virtue that could have made the pain smaller, and yet she survived it. And the thing that carried her through was not an idea but a practice, the simple repeated act of getting up each morning and tending to the work that needed to be done, putting one hand in the soil, mixing one remedy, caring for one person. And she says that perhaps this is what Boethius meant, though he was too much of a philosopher to say it plainly, that the consolation is not in the thinking, but in the doing. Cormac writes this down later in his notebook of riddles, though it is not a riddle. It is, he thinks, perhaps the truest thing anyone has ever said to him. Meanwhile, a different kind of relationship is forming between Ingrid and Theodoric. The young man has begun spending time in the hospice as well. His official assignment is to help with the heavier work, carrying water and firewood and occasionally restraining a feverish patient. But Ingrid quickly recognizes something in him that the other monks have missed. She sees the drawings. One day, when Theodoric leaves a scrap of parchment on the workroom table, a sketch of the hospice cat done in a few quick lines, Ingrid picks it up and studies it for a long time. She does not say anything about it directly because she is not a woman who offers compliments easily. But the next day she gives Theodoric a small pot of the red ochre pigment she uses to mark her herb jars, and she tells him that if he is going to draw, he might as well use proper color. It is such a small gift, but for Theodoric it is enormous. It is the first time anyone has acknowledged his drawing as something real, not a distraction, not a waste of time, but something worth doing properly. He takes the pot of pigment back to his storage room, and he sits with it in his hands for a long time, feeling its weight, and something in him begins to shift, like a door that has been painted shut finally cracking open. In February, when the snow is deep and the road from the river crossing is barely passable, a traveler arrives at Sankt Felician. He comes on a mule, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, and he is accompanied by a single servant who looks even more miserable than his master. The monks at the gate welcome them. Hospitality to travelers is a sacred obligation under the rule, and bring them to the guest house, where a fire is built and warm food is brought. The traveler's name is Harun. He is a physician, originally from Cordoba in the south of what we now call Spain, where a thriving Islamic culture has produced scholars, doctors, poets, and mathematicians of extraordinary skill. Harun is not a Muslim himself. He is a Christian, one of the Mozarabic community that lives under Islamic rule, but he has been educated in the Arabic medical tradition, and he carries with him a collection of texts and instruments that the monks of Sankt Felician have never seen before. He is traveling north to the court of a Frankish bishop who has heard of his reputation and wishes to consult him about an illness. The snow has delayed his journey, and he will stay at the abbey for several weeks, waiting for the roads to clear. During this time he becomes one of the most fascinating presences the abbey has encountered in years. Abbot Leopold, ever curious, invites Harun to dine with him and quickly discovers that this quiet, courteous man possesses knowledge that fills in gaps the abbot had not even known existed. Harun speaks of the works of Galen and Hippocrates, Greek physicians whose writings are largely lost in the Frankish lands, but which survive in Arabic translation in the libraries of Cordoba and Baghdad. He speaks of a great institution in Baghdad called the House of Wisdom, where scholars of every faith and nation gather to translate and study the works of the ancient world. He speaks of mathematics, of a number system using symbols called numerals that makes calculation far simpler than the Roman system the monks struggle with. For Cormac, Harun's arrival is electrifying. Here is a man who has read texts that Cormac has only heard rumors of, works of Aristotle that were never translated into Latin, medical treatises, astronomical observations, philosophical commentaries. The two men spend long evenings in the guest house talking by firelight, and Cormac feels something he has not felt in years, the pure, uncomplicated joy of intellectual discovery. Harun, for his part, is delighted to find a Frankish monk who can read Greek and who is genuinely interested in ideas rather than merely in their orthodoxy. He shows Cormac a text, a partial Arabic translation of Aristotle's Poetics, a work on the nature of art and storytelling. And though Cormac cannot read Arabic, Harun translates passages aloud, and Cormac writes them down in Latin, and something extraordinary happens. A text that traveled from ancient Greece to the Islamic world now finds its way, however imperfectly, into a monastery in the Frankish heartland. The chain of hands extends. But it is Harun's meeting with Ingrid that produces the most immediate and practical result. When Harun learns that the abbey has a healer, he asks to see the hospice, and when he arrives, he finds Ingrid tending a patient with a badly infected wound on his leg, a farmer from the village who cut himself on a scythe blade. Harun watches her work, notes her herbs and her technique, and then, quietly and respectfully, offers a suggestion. He has a preparation, a paste made from honey and certain mineral salts, that he has seen used effectively for such infections in Cordoba. He offers to show her how to make it. Ingrid is wary at first. She is not accustomed to strangers in her hospice, and Harun's foreignness, his accent, his unfamiliar clothes, his different manner, makes her cautious. But she is also a practical woman, and the farmer's leg is not healing, and when Harun prepares his paste and applies it, and the wound begins to improve within days, Ingrid's wariness dissolves into something far more powerful, curiosity. She asks questions, dozens of them, about the herbs used in Cordoba, about the medical theories, about the instruments Harun carries in his leather case, and Harun answers patiently and shows her things she has never seen, a fine set of surgical tools, a text with illustrations of the human body, a small vial of a distilled essence that smells of roses and can ease the pain of a headache when applied to the temples. Over the weeks of his stay, Harun and Ingrid develop a rapport that surprises both of them. They are similar people in a way, practical, grounded, more interested in what works than in why it works, and both carrying private griefs that they recognize in each other without either one naming it. Before he leaves, Harun copies out several of his medical recipes in Latin with Cormac's help, and gives them to Ingrid, along with a small pouch of seeds for plants that do not grow in this region, but that, with care, might be cultivated. It is a gift from one tradition to another, across a distance of language and culture and faith, and it is one of the 10,000 small, unremarkable exchanges through which the knowledge of the ancient world was kept alive during these centuries, not through grand programs or royal decrees, but through two people sitting in a room, sharing what they knew. Spring arrives the way it always does in a river valley, gradually, tentatively, as if the earth is not quite sure it can trust the warmth. The snow melts from the south-facing slopes first, and the river swells, and one morning the monks wake to find that the orchard trees have put out their first pale buds, tiny and fragile and astonishing, the way new life always is. Ingrid is in her garden from dawn to dusk now, turning the soil, planting seeds, coaxing the first green shoots from the earth. Among the familiar herbs, the sage and rosemary and lavender that are the backbone of her pharmacopoeia, she has planted Haroun's seeds carefully in a sheltered corner near the south wall of the hospice where they will get the most warmth. She does not know if they will grow. Some plants do not survive transplanting, just as some ideas do not survive translation, but she tends them with the same careful attention she gives to everything, and she waits, and in time, slowly, tentatively like the spring itself, small green stems appear. In the Scriptorium, Cormac is deep in his work on Boethius, but something has changed in the way he approaches it. His conversations with Haroun have given him a new sense of the vastness of the intellectual world beyond these walls, the realization that the texts he copies are not the whole of human thought, but merely the fragments that have reached this particular shore, carried by the accident of history. It makes the work feel both more important and more humble. He is not preserving everything. He cannot, but he is preserving something, and that something matters. He has also begun something new. In the margins of his copy of Boethius, alongside the traditional glosses and annotations, he has started writing his own commentary, brief, careful notes in which he engages with the text not as a scribe, but as a reader. He disagrees with Boethius on certain points. He finds other passages luminous and says so. He records Ingrid's observation about consolation through doing and marks it as a counterpoint to the philosopher's more abstract argument. It is a small thing, and it is somewhat irregular. Scribes are expected to copy faithfully, not to insert their own thoughts. But Cormac does it anyway, in tiny script tucked into the lower margins, because he has come to believe that a book is not just a record of one mind, but a conversation across time, and that adding his voice to that conversation is not a violation of the text, but a completion of it. Abbot Leopold, when he discovers these marginalia during one of his inspections of the Scriptorium's work, pauses for a long time. He reads Cormac's notes carefully, and then he does something remarkable. He smiles, and he says nothing, and he moves on to the next desk. It is his way of giving permission. Theodoric, meanwhile, has been undergoing his own quiet transformation. The pot of red ochre that Ingrid gave him has been joined by other pigments. He has learned, by careful observation and experimentation, how to make his own colors from the materials available to him. A deep blue from crushed lapis lazuli, a precious stone that occasionally appears in the abbey's supplies for manuscript illumination. A warm yellow from saffron, a rich green from verdigris, the patina that forms on copper. He keeps these colors in small clay pots in his storage room, and his drawings have blossomed into something remarkable, vivid, detailed images of the natural world that combine the careful observation of a trained eye with a freedom and spontaneity that no manuscript illumination would permit. He has also cautiously begun to let others see his work. Ingrid first, who receives his drawings with the same practical appreciation she gives to everything. She tells him which plants he has drawn accurately and which he has gotten wrong, and she makes him redraw the comfrey until the leaves are correct. Then Cormac, who is struck by the drawings and says in his quiet, understated way that Theodoric has an eye that sees what most people merely look at. And finally, almost by accident, Abbot Leovold, who visits the storage room looking for spare parchment and finds Theodoric's collection spread across the floor. The abbot studies the drawings for a long time. He asks Theodoric questions, where he learned to draw, what he sees when he looks at a hair or a tree or a face. Theodoric answers honestly, which is to say haltingly, because he has never been asked to articulate something that lives so deep inside him it has no ready words, and the abbot listens and nods and does not say what he is thinking, which is this, that this young man has a gift that does not belong in a monastery. Not because the monastery is the wrong place for gifts, it is not, but because this particular gift needs room to grow, needs training and mentorship and the company of other artists, and Sanct Felician cannot provide those things. Leovold keeps this thought to himself for now, but he begins to make inquiries in his letters to other abbots and bishops about where a young man with such a talent might go to develop it. In June, a merchant caravan passes through the valley, as it does several times each year, following the river road south toward the Alpine passes and the markets of northern Italy. The merchants stop at the abbey to trade, the monks produce excellent honey, fine parchment, and a beer that is locally famous, and for a few days the quiet enclosure of Sanct Felician is disrupted by the noise and color and energy of the commercial world. Among the merchants is a man named Gerald, a trader in his 40s who has been making this route for 20 years. He is a large, jovial, deeply tanned man with a booming laugh and a seemingly inexhaustible supply of stories about the places he has been. The marble cities of northern Italy, the great port of Marseille, the mountain passes where the air is so thin you can see the curve of the earth. He has traded in silk and spices and metalwork, and he has an eye for beautiful things. He wears a brooch of Byzantine enamel work on his cloak that catches the light like a small captured fire. Theodoric is assigned to help with the trading, carrying barrels of honey, counting pelts, and he finds himself drawn to Gerald the way a moth is drawn to a lantern, not just because of the stories, though the stories are wonderful, but because Gerald represents something that Theodoric has almost never encountered, a life of movement, of choice, of wide horizons, a life in which you wake up in a different place than where you fell asleep, a life in which the road continues. Over the course of 3 days, Theodoric and Gerald develop an easy rapport. Gerald is the kind of man who talks to everyone, monks, servants, donkeys, with the same cheerful directness, and he takes a genuine interest in the young monk who helps him stack barrels with such earnest care. When Theodoric, in a moment of courage, shows Gerald one of his drawings, a sketch of the merchant's own mule done quickly in charcoal, Gerald's eyebrows rise and stay risen. He stares at the drawing for a long time. He turns it in the light, and then he tells Theodoric something that changes everything. He tells him about a workshop in the city of Metz to the west, where a master craftsman named Adalbero oversees a group of artisans who produce everything from metalwork to carved ivory to painted panels for churches. Gerald has traded with Adalbero for years and knows him to be a man who is always looking for talent, young people with skilled hands and sharp eyes whom he can train in the craft of making beautiful things. Gerald says that if Theodoric were to present himself at this workshop with his drawings, he believes Adalbero would take him on as an apprentice. It is said so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it takes Theodoric a moment to understand what he has heard. An apprenticeship in a city, making art not as a monk's minor eccentricity, but as a vocation, a trade, a life. The idea is so large that Theodoric cannot hold it all at once. He thanks Gerald and walks away, and he does not sleep that night, and for the first time in his life he allows himself to imagine a future that is different from the one that has been laid out for him since he was 7 years old. In the days that follow, Theodoric is distracted and quiet, more so than usual. Cormac notices and says nothing because Cormac is a man who understands the need for private thought. But Ingrid notices and does say something because Ingrid is a woman who believes that silence, past a certain point, becomes its own kind of illness. She finds Theodoric in the garden one evening, sitting on the low wall by the herb beds, staring at his hands, and she sits beside him and waits until he is ready to speak. When he tells her about Gerald's suggestion, about the workshop in Metz, about the possibility that has opened up before him like a door in a wall he thought was solid, Ingrid listens without interrupting. She does not tell him what to do. She does not weigh the merits of staying versus leaving. She asks him one question, and it is the right question, the only question that matters. When you imagine yourself in that workshop, what do you feel? And Theodoric is quiet for a long time, and then he says, very softly, that he feels like himself. What happens next unfolds over several weeks, and it unfolds more gently than Theodoric expects. He goes to Abbot Leovold. He expects resistance, perhaps anger, perhaps disappointment, perhaps a lecture about duty and obedience and the permanence of religious vows. But Theodoric has not yet taken his permanent vows. He is still technically free to leave, and Leovold, who has already been making his inquiries, who has already sensed the direction of this young man's life, receives the news with a calm that borders on something like relief. Leovold tells Theodoric that he has written to the Bishop of Metz about the workshop, and that the bishop knows of Adalbero and speaks well of him. He tells Theodoric that the abbey will provide him with a letter of introduction, a small sum of money, and provisions for the journey. He tells him that leaving is not a failure and not a betrayal, that God works through many kinds of hands, and that the hands that make beautiful things are no less holy than the hands that copy Scripture. Theodoric weeps. He does not expect to, but the tears come, not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming experience of being seen and understood by someone he had believed could not see him. The abbot places a hand on his shoulder and lets him cry, and the room is quiet except for the sound of the garden through the open window. There are farewells to be made. Brother Anselm, the novice master, embraces Theodoric and tells him to eat properly and to say his prayers, and his eyes are red. The other monks press small gifts into his hands, a carved wooden cross, a packet of dried apples, a pair of warm stockings knitted by one of the village women who does mending for the abbey. Cormac gives him the notebook of riddles, not a copy, the original, the one he has been keeping for years. He tells Theodoric to read one whenever the road feels long, and Theodoric holds the small leather book against his chest and cannot speak. Ingrid gives him a bundle of herbs, dried lavender for sleep, comfrey for bruises, chamomile for the stomach, wrapped in a square of clean linen. She also gives him something else, a piece of parchment on which she has written in her careful, slightly uneven hand a single line. It reads, "When you imagine yourself there, you feel like yourself. Remember this always." And then there is his father. Word has been sent to Aldrich's estate, and the old soldier arrives 2 days before Theodoric's departure, dusty from the road. He stands in the guest hall and looks at his son, really looks at him, perhaps for the first time, and whatever he sees makes his jaw tighten in a way that could be anger or could be something else entirely. They walk together in the orchard among the ripening apples, and their conversation is, as always, halting and imperfect. But at the end of it, Aldrich does something he has never done before. He takes Theodoric's hand and turns it over and studies the charcoal stains on the fingers, and he says that Theodoric's mother, who died the year after Theodoric came to the abbey, a fact that no one ever told the boy, a silence that Aldrich now breaks with clumsy, aching honesty, that his mother had the same hands. She drew, too, flowers mostly, on scraps of fabric with plant dyes. She would have understood. It is not forgiveness, exactly, because there is nothing to forgive. It is something rarer and more difficult. It is recognition, arriving late but arriving nonetheless, and Theodoric receives it the way dry ground receives rain. On a warm morning in July, Theodoric walks out through the abbey gate with a pack on his back and the road stretching before him. He is terrified and elated and sad and free all at once, the way a person is when they are finally moving in the direction of their own life. He does not look back, though he wants to. The gate closes softly behind him. The road descends toward the river. The world opens up. Let us stay a little longer at St. Felician in the weeks after Theodoric's departure. The abbey is quieter without him, though it was quiet before. His absence is felt in small ways. The empty seat at the refectory table, the storage room that is now just a storage room again, the way Ingrid sometimes turns to say something to someone who is no longer there. But the work continues. It always continues. This is one of the truths of monastic life, and one of the reasons it endures. The rhythms are larger than any single person. The bell rings for matins in the dark. The sun rises, the scriptorium opens, the quills scratch, the ink flows, the pages accumulate. Cormac finishes his copy of Boethius in September. It has taken him just over a year, 312 pages of careful, elegant script, with his own marginalia threaded through the text, like a second voice in a conversation. When the last page is done, he sets down his quill and sits for a long time, looking at the finished work, and he feels a strange mixture of exhaustion and tenderness, the way a parent might feel looking at a child who is complete and ready to go out into the world. Abbot Leovald inspects the manuscript and declares it excellent. He adds it to the abbey's library, a growing collection of perhaps 200 volumes that are stored in a dry room adjacent to the Scriptorium, arranged on wooden shelves, each one wrapped in a soft cloth to protect its binding. 200 volumes. It does not sound like many, but in an age when every book must be made by hand, letter by letter, it is a treasure beyond reckoning. In this room are works of theology and scripture, of course, Bibles, psalters, commentaries, the writings of the Church Fathers, but there are also works of Roman poetry, of Greek philosophy and Latin translation, of history and natural science and medicine. There is a copy of Virgil's Aeneid. There is a collection of Cicero's letters. There is a herbal, a book of plant remedies illustrated with careful drawings that Ingrid consults regularly and that now includes, tucked between its pages, the Latin translations of Harun's recipes. Each of these books is a survivor. Each one exists only because someone, somewhere, at some point in the chain of centuries, decided that it was worth the labor of copying. And each one, if it is copied again, if it is sent to another monastery, or if a visiting scholar transcribes a portion, extends the chain a little further, pushes the light a little deeper into the future. Cormac begins his next project, a copy of Isidore of Seville's Etymologies, a vast encyclopedia of all the knowledge of the ancient world, organized by subject, from grammar to astronomy, from medicine to agriculture, from the nature of God to the names of rivers. It will take him 3 years at least. He settles into it the way a swimmer settles into a long crossing, with patience and rhythm and the understanding that the far shore is distant but real, and Ingrid tends her garden. Harun's plants have flourished as she hoped they might. The seeds from Cordoba have produced small, sturdy plants with unfamiliar leaves and a sharp, citrusy fragrance that she has not encountered before. She does not yet know all their uses, but she is experimenting carefully the way she does everything. She has also begun something new. She is teaching. A girl from the village, the granddaughter of the beekeeper who keeps the abbey's hives, has been coming to the hospice each morning, and Ingrid is showing her the herbs one by one, the names, the properties, the preparations. The girl is 12 years old and attentive and unafraid of hard work, and Ingrid sees in her something that she recognizes, the same practical curiosity, the same steady hands, the same impulse to heal. It is a kind of copying, too, this teaching, a different kind, not the reproduction of words on a page, but the transmission of knowledge from one mind to another, from one pair of hands to the next. Ingrid does not think of it in those terms. She simply thinks that the girl needs to learn, and that she has things to teach, and that this is reason enough. The day is ending at Sankt Felician. The light has gone from the valley, and the first stars are appearing above the eastern hills, faint and steady and impossibly far away. The bell rings for Compline, the final office of the day, the prayer that marks the boundary between waking and sleep. The monks file into the chapel one last time. The candles are few, and the darkness presses in from the corners, soft and deep. The stone walls hold the faint warmth of the day, and the air smells of beeswax and old incense and the particular, indefinable smell of a place where people have prayed for decades, a cumulative scent like the memory of devotion. Cormac stands in his usual place near the back, his hands folded in the sleeves of his cowl. His eyes are tired from the day's work in the Scriptorium, and his fingers still carry the faint stain of ink. He sings the Compline Psalms from memory, his voice a low, steady thread in the weave of sound, and as he sings, his mind drifts, not away from the prayer, but deeper into it, into that place where words stop being words and become something closer to breath, closer to the rhythm of the blood, closer to sleep. He thinks of his mother. He thinks of Boethius, who wrote his great book in a prison cell, awaiting death, and who found consolation not in escape, but in understanding. He thinks of Harun, who is somewhere on a road to the north by now, carrying his books and his instruments toward another meeting, another exchange, another link in the chain. He thinks of Theodoric, who is somewhere on a road to the west, carrying his charcoal and his pigments and his gift toward a life that is his own. And he thinks, not for the first time, that the world is held together not by the grand structures of empire or church, but by these small, persistent acts of passing something precious from one hand to the next. Ingrid is not in the chapel tonight. She is in the hospice, sitting with an old man from the village who is dying, quietly, gently, the way an ember dies when the fire is burned down. She holds his hand and speaks to him softly, and the words she uses are words of comfort, and some of them are scripture, and some of them are older than scripture, and all of them are true. The old man's breathing slows, and the candle on the table beside him flickers in a draught from the open door. That door that Ingrid always keeps open because she believes in fresh air, because she believes that the boundary between inside and outside, like the boundary between the living and the dead, should be gentle and permeable and nothing to be afraid of. In the chapel, the monks sing the final words of Compline, the ancient prayer that has closed every monastic day for centuries. In manus tuas, Domine, commendo spiritum meum. Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. It is a prayer of release, of letting go, of trusting the darkness, of believing that what has been done today is enough, and that the morning will come and the work will continue. The candles are extinguished one by one. The monks file out in silence. The chapel stands empty in the dark, holding the echo of their voices the way a vessel holds water after the water has been poured. And now the silence gathers. The abbey sleeps. The cat on the kitchen wall tucks its nose under its paw. The river murmurs below the hill, and the stars turn slowly overhead, the same stars that Boethius saw from his prison window, the same stars that the scholars in Baghdad study with instruments of brass and silver, the same stars that will shine over the workshop in Metz, where a young man is just arriving, dusty and nervous and alive with possibility. The light is kept. The chain holds. The hands that wrote the words are still for now, but the words remain, and they will be here when the morning comes. And you, too, are part of this long, quiet chain. You, listening in the dark, letting these words settle around you like a blanket. You are the person that Cormac could not imagine, the reader 1,000 years hence, the one for whom all this was done. The words survived. They crossed the centuries. They reached you. So let them go now. Let the abbey grow quiet in your mind. Let the images soften and blur. The scriptorium, the garden, the chapel, the road. Let the river murmur fade to silence.